Single father misses interview to save girl and discovers she is the daughter of the company's owner. Just before we start, drop a flag emoji that represents your country. David Miller adjusted his tie for the 10th time as he walked through downtown Springfield. The October morning was crisp, and his breath formed small clouds in the cool Illinois air. At 35, he carried the weight of 6 months of unemployment on his shoulders, but today felt different. Today, Harrison Industries would finally give him the chance he desperately needed. "Please, God, let this work out," he whispered, checking his watch. 8:45, perfect timing for his 9 o'clock interview. The screech of tires shattered the morning calm. David's head snapped toward the intersection ahead. A small yellow school bus had stopped abruptly, its doors swinging open. Children were spilling out, but something was wrong. A little girl with blonde pigtails had dropped her backpack and was chasing it into the street, directly into the path of an oncoming delivery truck. The truck driver was looking at his phone, completely unaware. Without thinking, David dropped his briefcase and sprinted forward. His polished dress shoes slipped on the wet pavement, but he pushed harder. The little girl bent down to grab her backpack, still oblivious to the approaching danger. "Stop!" David yelled, but the truck kept coming. He reached the girl just as the massive vehicle bore down on them. In one fluid motion, he scooped her up and rolled them both toward the sidewalk. The truck's horn blared as the driver finally looked up, slamming on his brakes. The vehicle skidded past them, missing David's leg by inches. The little girl was crying now, her blue eyes wide with fear and confusion. David held her close, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It's okay, sweetheart, you're safe now," he said softly, brushing dirt from her blonde hair. "Sophie! Oh my God, Sophie!" A woman with a thick accent came running from the bus. "I turned around for 1 second. She's fine," David assured her, helping the little girl to her feet. "Just shaken up." The bus driver had called 911, and sirens were already approaching. David looked at his watch. 8:58. His interview was starting in 2 minutes, and Harrison Industries was still 4 blocks away. The little girl, Sophie, clung to his hand. "Don't leave me," she whispered. David looked toward the gleaming Harrison Industries building in the distance, then back at the frightened child. There was no choice to make. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, kneeling down to her level. "What's your phone number? We need to call your family." As paramedics arrived and began checking Sophie over, David's phone buzzed with a call from Harrison Industries. He watched it go to voicemail, knowing he'd just lost the most important opportunity of his life. But looking at Sophie's grateful smile, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The emergency room at Springfield General Hospital buzzed with quiet efficiency. David sat in the waiting area, still wearing his now rumpled interview suit, watching as doctors finished examining Sophie. The little girl had insisted he stay close, and the hospital staff, unable to reach her family immediately, had allowed it. "Mr. Miller?" A tall man with salt and pepper hair approached, his expensive suit impeccable despite the obvious stress etched on his face. "I'm Robert Harrison, Sophie's father." David stood, extending his hand. "I'm glad she's okay. The doctors say she just has some minor scrapes." Robert's grip was firm, his grey eyes intense with emotion. "They told me what you did, how you saved her." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't know how to thank you." "Any parent would have done the same thing," David replied simply. "No." Robert shook his head. "Not everyone would have risked their own safety like that. Sophie told me you were dressed up, that you seemed to be going somewhere important." David's jaw tightened slightly. It wasn't that important. Robert studied him carefully. There was something in this man's demeanor, a quiet strength mixed with barely concealed worry that reminded him of himself. "What's your story, David?" "If you don't mind me asking." They sat down together as David considered how much to share. I'm a single father. Lost my wife 2 years ago to cancer. Been raising my 8-year-old daughter Emma on my own. I was actually heading to a job interview when I saw Sophie. You missed your interview to save my daughter. Some things are more important than jobs, David said, though the weight of his financial situation pressed heavily on him. Robert was quiet for a long moment. He knew exactly what David was feeling. The overwhelming responsibility of single parenthood, the constant worry about providing for your child, the loneliness that came with carrying it all alone. He'd been living that reality for over a year since his own wife's death. Sophie's mother died last year, Robert said quietly. Breast cancer. So I understand what you're carrying. The two men sat in comfortable silence, watching through the glass as Sophie colored in a hospital coloring book, her blonde pigtails now neatly braided by a kind nurse. "Daddy!" Sophie called out when she saw Robert. She ran to him and he swept her into his arms. "I was so scared, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. "David saved me, Daddy. He's a hero," Sophie announced solemnly. Robert looked at David over his daughter's head. "Yes, he is." As they prepared to leave, Robert turned back to David. "I meant what I said about thanking you. If there's anything at all that I can do for you, please don't hesitate to ask." David watched them walk away, Robert's protective hand on Sophie's shoulder. He thought about mentioning the missed interview about Harrison Industries, but his pride held him back. Some opportunities once lost were gone forever. Or so he thought. The rejection email arrived Tuesday morning while David was making breakfast for Emma. His daughter, a bright 8-year-old with his dark hair and her mother's kind eyes, was carefully arranging her cereal into patterns, a habit she'd developed since her mother's death. "Due to your absence from yesterday's scheduled interview, we have moved forward with other candidates," the email read. David's hands trembled as he set his phone down. "Daddy, you look sad," Emma observed, looking up from her bowl. "Just thinking about work stuff, sweetheart," David forced a smile. "Eat up or you'll be late for school." As Emma finished breakfast, David mentally calculated their remaining savings. 2 months, maybe 3 if he cut back on groceries and Emma's after-school program. The thought of disappointing his daughter made his stomach clench. "Mrs. Peterson says there's a father-daughter dance at school next month," Emma said casually, but David caught the hope in her voice. "That sounds fun," he managed, knowing the ticket price would strain their already tight budget. After dropping Emma at Riverside Elementary, David spent the day job hunting. He applied to accounting positions, customer service roles, even part-time retail jobs. The responses were either immediate rejections or deafening silence. By afternoon, desperation crept in. He found himself standing outside Harrison Industries, staring up at the gleaming building where he should have interviewed yesterday. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd sacrificed this opportunity to save the daughter of someone who worked here, someone he'd never even see again. "Sir, are you all right?" A security guard approached, concerned by David's prolonged staring. "Sorry, I was just leaving," David muttered, walking away. That evening, as Emma did homework at their small kitchen table, David opened bills with growing dread. Rent, utilities, Emma's school expenses, the numbers didn't add up. He'd sold his wife Sarah's car months ago, pawned her jewelry to pay for Emma's summer camp. What was left to sacrifice? "Daddy, can you help me with this math problem?" Emma asked. David looked at the worksheet. Basic multiplication, something that should have been simple but felt overwhelming in his current state. "Sure, baby. What's the problem?" "If someone saves $7 every week, how much do they save in a year?" David stared at the problem, thinking about their empty savings account. $364, he said quietly. "Wow, that's a lot." Emma grinned. "Maybe I should start saving my allowance." "Maybe you should," David agreed, not mentioning that her allowance had stopped 2 months ago when he ran out of extra money. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, David sat at his laptop sending out more applications. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Robert Harrison. I got your number from the hospital. Could we meet for coffee tomorrow? I'd like to thank you properly for what you did for Sophie." David stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "That's not necessary, but thank you." The response came quickly. "Please. It would mean a lot to both Sophie and me. 10 a.m. at Café Luna on 5th Street? Against his better judgment, David typed, "I'll be there." Café Luna was a cozy corner shop with exposed brick walls and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans. David arrived early, choosing a table near the window where he could watch the morning foot traffic. He dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, since this wasn't a job interview. At exactly 10 o'clock, Robert Harrison walked in, and David was struck again by the man's commanding presence. Even in weekend clothes, Robert carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "David, thank you for coming," Robert said warmly, settling into the chair across from him. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering us both coffee. Sophie insisted I get you something called a hero drink, which apparently means extra shots." David smiled despite himself. "She's a sweet kid. She hasn't stopped talking about you since yesterday. She's drawn you 3 pictures and informed her class that she has a real-life superhero friend." They sat quietly for a moment as the barista brought their drinks. Robert seemed to be wrestling with something, choosing his words carefully. "David, I need to be direct with you. I did some research after we met yesterday." David's stomach tightened. "Research? I wanted to understand who had saved my daughter. I found out about your wife, Sarah, about your situation. I know you're struggling financially, and I know you missed an important job interview to help Sophie." Heat rose in David's cheeks. "I didn't tell you those things so you'd feel sorry for me." "I don't feel sorry for you," Robert said firmly. "I feel grateful and impressed. Do you know how rare it is to find someone who puts humanity before personal gain?" "I just did what anyone would do?" "No, David. Most people would have kept walking to their interview. Most people would have assumed someone else would handle it." Robert leaned forward. "I want to offer you a position at my company." David blinked. "Your company?" "Harrison Industries. I have significant influence there." Robert pulled out a business card. "Senior financial analyst. Full benefits, competitive salary. You'd start Monday." David stared at the card, his mind reeling. Harrison Industries, the company where he'd missed his interview. The coincidence was staggering. I can't accept charity." "It's not charity. I've reviewed your credentials. You're overqualified for most positions you've been applying for. This role matches your experience and education. But you don't even know if I can do the job." Robert's expression grew serious. "David, in the past year since my wife died, I've met hundreds of people, colleagues, potential business partners, people claiming they want to help. Do you know how many of them would have risked their own future to save a stranger's child? 0. David felt overwhelmed by the offer, by Robert's intensity, by the possibility of solving his financial crisis in one conversation. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course. But David?" Robert stood, placing money on the table for the coffee. "Pride is a luxury that single fathers can't always afford. I learned that the hard way." As Robert walked away, David stared at the business card in his hands, wondering if accepting would make him practical or weak. David spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with Robert's offer. The business card sat on his kitchen counter like a lifeline he was too proud to grab. By Thursday morning, their financial situation had worsened. The car payment was due, and Emma needed new shoes for the rapidly approaching winter. "Daddy, my toes are poking through," Emma said matter-of-factly, showing him her worn sneakers as they walked to school. "We'll get you new ones this weekend," David promised, though he had no idea how. "It's okay if we wait," Emma said with the wisdom of a child who'd learned to read her father's worried expressions. "They're not that bad." David's heart ached. At 8 years old, his daughter was already learning to sacrifice her needs for his peace of mind. After dropping Emma off, David drove to the unemployment office. The waiting room was crowded with people in various stages of desperation. He filled out forms for temporary assistance programs, swallowing his pride with each signature. "Mr. Miller?" The caseworker, a tired-looking woman named Janet, called him into her cubicle. "I see you've been unemployed for 6 months. That's a long stretch." "I know. I've been applying everywhere." Janet flipped through his file. "With your education and experience, you should be finding work. Are you being too selective?" The question stung because David knew it was partially true. He'd turned down several minimum wage positions, telling himself he needed something that could actually support Emma. But was he being realistic or just prideful? There was one opportunity, David found himself saying, a good position at Harrison Industries. But the circumstances were complicated. Complicated how? David couldn't explain about Sophie, about Robert's offer, about how accepting felt like taking advantage of a grateful father. It just didn't work out. That afternoon, David swallowed his pride and applied to 3 retail positions. The managers looked at his overqualified resume with skepticism, clearly wondering why a former senior accountant wanted to stock shelves for minimum wage. "We'll call you," they all said, which David had learned meant no. Thursday evening brought another blow, a notice from Emma's school about overdue lunch account payments. David had forgotten they'd maxed out the account weeks ago, and Emma had been getting basic cheese sandwiches instead of hot meals. "Emma, why didn't you tell me about lunch?" David asked gently. She shrugged, focused on her homework. "The sandwiches are okay, and Mary in my class said her mom packs peanut butter every day, so I'm not the only one." David closed his eyes, feeling like a failure. His daughter was making excuses for his inability to provide properly for her. That night, after Emma was asleep, David sat at his kitchen table with Robert's business card. He picked up his phone 3 times to call, then set it down. His pride warred with his desperation, with Emma's worn shoes and missed lunches. Finally, at 11 p.m., he sent a text. "Robert, if the offer is still open, I'd like to discuss it." The response came within minutes. "Of course. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Harrison Industries, 42nd floor." David stared at the address, realizing he'd be returning to the building where his original interview should have taken place. Life, it seemed, had a sense of irony. "I'll be there," he typed back, wondering if he was making the right choice or simply the only choice he had left. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of Harrison Industries felt like ascending into another world. David had expected to meet Robert in a regular office, but as the doors opened, he found himself in an elegant reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Springfield. "Mr. Miller, Mr. Harrison is waiting for you," the receptionist said, with a professional smile that made David acutely aware of his off-the-rack suit. Robert's office was impressive, a corner suite with modern furniture and personal touches that spoke of a man who valued both success and family. Photos of Sophie covered one wall, and David noticed several that looked professionally taken, the kind wealthy families commissioned. "David, thank you for coming." Robert stood from behind a massive mahogany desk that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. "Please, sit." As David settled into a leather chair that was more comfortable than his own couch, he began to grasp the scope of Robert's position. This wasn't just an office. This was the command center of someone important. "Before we discuss the position, I want you to understand something," Robert said, moving to sit in the chair next to David rather than behind his desk. I didn't offer you this job out of pity or gratitude alone. Then why? Robert pulled out a folder. Because I had my HR director, Jennifer Walsh, review your background thoroughly. Your previous employers rave about your analytical skills and integrity. Your college professor still remembers you 15 years later. And your volunteer work with the Community Financial Literacy Program shows you care about more than just numbers. David was surprised. You contacted Professor Martinez and your former supervisor at Midwest Financial and the director of the literacy program. Robert opened the folder, revealing detailed notes. David, I've been CEO of Harrison Industries for 8 years. I didn't build this company by making emotional decisions. CEO? David's voice was barely a whisper. Robert nodded. I should have mentioned that earlier. Harrison Industries. My grandfather started it in 1962. I'm the third generation to run it. The room seemed to spin slightly. David was sitting across from the CEO of one of Springfield's largest companies, a man whose net worth was probably more than David would earn in several lifetimes. This makes it even more impossible for me to accept, David said. People will think I hired the best candidate for the job. Robert interrupted, which happens to be true. But the circumstances showed me your character. Do you know what my biggest challenge is as CEO? Finding people I can trust completely. People who make the right choice, even when it costs them personally. Robert stood and walked to the window. David, I've been where you are. Not financially. I was fortunate to inherit wealth. But emotionally. The overwhelming responsibility of raising a child alone, the fear that you're failing them, the loneliness of making every decision by yourself. It's terrifying, David admitted quietly, which is why I need someone on my executive team who understands what real responsibility means. Someone who doesn't just talk about family values, but lives them. Executive team? Robert turned back with a slight smile. Did I mention this is a senior position? You'd be reporting directly to our CFO with a clear path to promotion. Starting salary is $95,000, full medical and dental, 4 weeks vacation, and a year-end bonus structure. David felt lightheaded. It was more than he'd made at his previous job, more than he'd dared hope for. There's one condition, Robert continued. What? Sophie wants to meet Emma. She's convinced they'll be best friends because they both like unicorns and have superhero friends. Despite everything, David laughed. Emma would love that. So, you'll accept. David looked out the window at the city below, thinking about Emma's worn shoes and empty lunch account, about the pride that had kept him struggling for months. Yes, he said finally, I accept. As Robert smiled and extended his hand, David realized this was more than a job. It was a new beginning for both him and Emma. But he had no idea how much more complicated this new beginning would become. David's first week at Harrison Industries passed in a blur of orientation meetings, system training, and introductions to his new colleagues. The office culture was professional but warm, and his supervisor, CFO Margaret Chen, seemed genuinely pleased to have him on the team. Your financial projections for the quarterly review are exceptional, Margaret said Friday afternoon, reviewing David's first major assignment. Robert said you were talented, but this exceeds expectations. Thank you. I'm just grateful for the opportunity, David replied, still adjusting to having meaningful work again. The salary had already transformed his and Emma's daily life. New shoes for Emma, a fully stocked refrigerator, and the relief of paying bills without panic. But more than the financial security, David felt his confidence returning. He was good at this work, and it showed. David, could I see you for a moment? Robert appeared at his cubicle late Friday afternoon. In Robert's office, David was surprised to find Sophie sitting in one of the big leather chairs, her legs swinging as she colored in a book. "Daddy had to pick me up from school today," Sophie announced. "Mrs. Garcia got sick." "Sophie has a proposition for you," Robert said with an amused smile. "Tell him, sweetheart." Sophie set down her crayon and looked at David with serious blue eyes. "I want Emma to come to my birthday party next Saturday. It's going to have ponies and a bounce house and a really big cake." David glanced at Robert, who shrugged. "I tried to explain that Emma might be busy, but Sophie is quite persuasive. I told her all about Emma," Sophie continued, "how she likes unicorns and how her mommy is an angel in heaven like mine. I think we should be best friends." The innocence of her statement hit David hard. He'd struggled to explain death to Emma, but Sophie seemed to have found a way to process it that was both realistic and hopeful. "I think Emma would love to come," David said. "If it's really okay with your dad." "More than okay," Robert assured him. "Fair warning, though, Sophie's parties are elaborate. My late wife always went overboard, and I've continued the tradition." That evening, David told Emma about the invitation. Her reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "A real pony party, like with actual ponies I can ride." Emma bounced on the couch. "Can we get Sophie a really good present?" "Of course, sweetheart." "What do you think she'd like?" Emma considered this seriously. "Something that shows we're going to be real friends. Maybe matching friendship bracelets?" David smiled at his daughter's thoughtfulness. "That sounds perfect." Saturday morning brought unseasonably warm November weather, perfect for an outdoor party. Robert's house in the affluent Riverside neighborhood was impressive. A sprawling colonial with manicured gardens and a backyard that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "Daddy, this is like a princess house," Emma whispered as they walked up the circular driveway. The party was indeed elaborate. A professional entertainment company had set up pony rides, a bounce house, and a craft station. About 20 children ran around the perfectly landscaped backyard while parents chatted in small groups, most of them clearly from Springfield's social elite. David felt out of place in his department store khakis among men wearing expensive casual wear that probably cost more than his monthly car payment. But Emma ran straight to Sophie, and the two girls immediately bonded over the friendship bracelets Emma had picked out. "You must be Emma's father," a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair approached. "I'm Victoria Westbrook. My daughter Ashley is in Sophie's class." "David Miller. Nice to meet you." Victoria's smile was polite but assessing. "I don't think we've met before. Are you new to the Riverside area?" Before David could answer, Robert appeared with two other men. "David, I'd like you to meet some friends. This is Judge Harrison, no relation despite the name, and Dr. Michael Stevens." As they shook hands, David caught Victoria's surprised expression. She clearly hadn't expected him to be personally introduced by Robert. "David just joined my executive team at Harrison Industries," Robert explained. "He's our new senior financial analyst." The judge and doctor welcomed David warmly, but David noticed Victoria's demeanor shift slightly. There was a new calculation in her eyes, as if she were reassessing his place in their social hierarchy. "How wonderful," Victoria said. "What brings you to Springfield?" "I've lived here all my life," David replied simply. The conversation continued, but David felt the subtle probing of these people trying to place him in their world. He was relieved when Emma ran over, Sophie close behind. "Daddy, Sophie wants to know if we can have a play date next week. Can she come to our house?" David glanced at Robert, who nodded. "That sounds great, girls." As the party wound down, David found himself helping clean up despite Robert's protests. "You don't need to do that," Robert said, watching David stack chairs. "Force of habit. Emma and I always clean up after ourselves." Robert worked alongside him. "David, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." How do you do it? The single-parent thing, I mean. I have a housekeeper, a nanny for emergencies, all the resources money can buy, and I still feel like I'm failing Sophie half the time. David paused in his chair, stacking. I think we all feel that way. But you're not failing. Sophie's happy, confident, kind. You're doing something right. Some days it doesn't feel like enough. Welcome to parenthood, David said with a rueful smile. The guilt never goes away. You just learn to live with it. As they watched their daughters playing together on the swing set, both men felt a connection deeper than employer and employee. They were both just fathers, doing their best to raise good children in difficult circumstances. Neither of them could have predicted how complicated their growing friendship was about to become. The playdate, the following Friday, revealed the stark differences between David and Emma's modest apartment and the life Sophie was accustomed to. But if Sophie noticed the difference between her mansion and their two-bedroom rental, she didn't show it. This is cozy, she declared, settling onto their second-hand couch. It feels like a real family house. Emma beamed with pride as she gave Sophie the grand tour, pointing out her book collection and art projects with the enthusiasm of a museum guide. And this is my mom's picture, Emma said, showing Sophie the framed photo on her dresser. Daddy says she's watching over us from heaven. Sophie studied the picture carefully. She looks nice, like she gives good hugs. The best hugs, Emma agreed solemnly. David watched from the doorway, struck by how naturally the girls connected. When Robert arrived to pick up Sophie, he seemed equally moved by their easy friendship. Emma, thank you for having me over, Sophie said with formal politeness that was clearly something she'd been taught. Your house is very nice. After they left, Emma was quiet during dinner. What are you thinking about, sweetheart? David asked. Sophie has a really big house and lots of toys, but she seemed happier here, Emma said thoughtfully. Do you think she's lonely sometimes? David was amazed by his daughter's perceptiveness. What makes you think that? She kept asking about our traditions, like how we read together every night and make pancakes on Sundays. She said they don't have special traditions, just stuff the housekeeper does. That night, David found himself thinking about Robert's question at the party. Despite all his resources, Robert seemed to struggle with the same fears and uncertainties that kept David awake at night. The following week brought a new challenge at work. Harrison Industries was preparing to bid on a major municipal contract, and David was assigned to lead the financial analysis team. It was his first high-profile project, and he felt the pressure of proving himself worthy of Robert's faith in him. The numbers need to be perfect, Margaret Chen emphasized during their Monday morning meeting. This contract could secure our growth for the next 5 years. David threw himself into the work, staying late several evenings to refine the projections. Emma was understanding, spending those evenings at their neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. But David felt guilty about the extra time away from her. Thursday evening, as David was finally heading home after a particularly long day, he found Robert still in his office. Working late again? Robert asked. Just want to make sure everything's right for tomorrow's presentation, David replied. You know, I used to do the same thing when Sophie was younger. Stay late, bring work home, convince myself it was all for her benefit. Robert closed his laptop. Want to know what I learned? What's that? She didn't need me to be perfect at work. She needed me to be present at home. David absorbed this advice. It's hard to find the balance, especially when you're trying to prove yourself. But David, you've already proven yourself. The work you've done this week is exceptional. You don't need to sacrifice time with Emma to impress me. I just don't want to let you down. Robert stood and gathered his things. The only way you could let me down is if you forgot why we're really doing this work, to provide for our families, not to escape from them. As they walked to the elevator together, Robert made a suggestion that would change everything. Listen, Sophie's been asking about Thanksgiving plans. My brother usually hosts, but his family's traveling this year. Emma mentioned you two usually just have a quiet dinner at home. What if we combined forces? The girls would love it, and honestly, I'm dreading the thought of another lonely holiday. David hesitated. Thanksgiving had been particularly difficult since Sarah's death. Too much empty space at their small table, too many memories of better times. That's really generous, but think about it, Robert interrupted gently. 2 single dads, 2 daughters who are becoming best friends. We could start a new tradition. That night, David discussed it with Emma while they did dishes together. A Thanksgiving with Sophie? Really? Emma's eyes lit up. Could we cook together? Sophie said she's never helped make Thanksgiving dinner. If we go, we'd probably go to Mr. Harrison's house. He has a much bigger kitchen. Emma considered this. But would it feel like our Thanksgiving, with our traditions? It was a fair question. Their Thanksgiving traditions were simple but meaningful. Making stuffing from Sarah's recipe, watching the parade together, sharing what they were grateful for. We could bring our traditions with us, David suggested. Share them with Sophie and Mr. Harrison. Emma smiled. I think Mommy would like that. She always said holidays were about bringing people together. As David tucked Emma into bed that night, he realized that accepting Robert's invitation felt like more than just sharing a meal. It felt like opening their small family to let others in, a step toward building something new while honoring what they'd lost. He had no idea that this decision would soon uncover secrets that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his new boss and friend. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect November weather in Springfield. David and Emma arrived at Robert's house at 10 a.m., carrying Sarah's stuffing ingredients and a sense of nervous excitement. Welcome to the Harrison Industries Executive Kitchen, Robert joked as he let them in. Fair warning, I'm much better at reading financial reports than following recipes. The kitchen was indeed impressive, with professional-grade appliances and enough counter space for a small restaurant. Sophie was already there, wearing a child-sized apron that was still too big for her. Emma, we're going to cook everything together, Sophie announced. Daddy said we can make whatever we want. As the girls enthusiastically took charge of the meal preparation, David found himself working alongside Robert, teaching him Sarah's stuffing recipe while sharing stories about past Thanksgivings. Sarah always said the secret was the sage, David explained, showing Robert how to season the bread mixture. She'd make me taste it about 20 times before she was satisfied. She sounds like she was an amazing cook. She was amazing at everything, David said simply. Some days I still reach for the phone to call her when something good happens to Emma. Robert nodded knowingly. I do the same thing. Patricia loved planning Sophie's parties. I still catch myself thinking about what she would have done differently. As they worked, the men found themselves sharing memories and fears with surprising ease. The kitchen filled with the warm scents of roasting turkey and homemade bread, while the girls decorated the dining room with hand-drawn place cards and autumn leaves from the backyard. Mr. David, Sophie said seriously as she helped Emma arrange the table settings. Emma says your wife is an angel. Do you think our moms know each other in heaven? David and Robert exchanged glances over the girls' heads. I think they probably do, David replied gently. Good. Sophie nodded with satisfaction. Then they can be friends too. The meal itself was perfect, not because the food was flawless, but because it felt like a real family dinner. They shared what they were grateful for, with Emma thanking God for Sophie and Mr. Robert, and Sophie expressing gratitude for David saving her and for her new best friend. After dinner, while the girls played in Sophie's elaborate playroom, David and Robert sat in the living room with coffee, watching the sun set over Robert's manicured backyard. This was nice, Robert said. Different than what I expected when I woke up this morning. Different how? Less lonely. The holidays have been hard since Patricia died. Too much space, too much quiet. David understood completely. We usually spend the day trying to stay busy. This was better. Robert was quiet for a moment, then said, "David, can I tell you something? About the job offer, I mean." "Sure." "It wasn't just about gratitude or your qualifications. I mean, those were important, but there was something else." Robert stared into his coffee cup. "The day you saved Sophie, I was supposed to be at the school for her fall festival. I'd promised her I'd be there, but I had a client emergency that seemed more important." David waited for him to continue. "When the hospital called, my first thought wasn't relief that she was safe. It was guilt that I hadn't been there to protect her myself." Robert looked up. "Then I met you, someone who'd sacrificed his own opportunity to protect my daughter when I couldn't. It made me realize what kind of father I wanted to be." "Robert, I'm not finished. Hiring you wasn't charity, but it also wasn't purely business. I wanted to keep you close because you remind me of the man I should be. The father I should be." David felt the weight of Robert's confession. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone. "I know, and I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable, but I want you to know that you've changed our lives in ways that go beyond the job." Before David could respond, Sophie came running into the room with Emma close behind. "Daddy, can Emma sleep over, please? We want to watch movies and paint our nails and have a real sleepover." David started to object. They hadn't planned for a sleepover, and Emma didn't have her things, but Robert was already nodding. "I have extra toothbrushes and pajamas from when Sophie's cousins visit. If it's okay with you, David, the girls can have their sleepover." Emma looked at David with hopeful eyes. He realized this was another step in their new life, letting go of his careful control over every aspect of their routine. "All right," he agreed, and both girls erupted in cheers. As David prepared to leave, Robert walked him to the door. "Thank you for today, for sharing your traditions with us. Thank you for giving us somewhere to share them." Driving home alone felt strange after such a family-filled day. David's apartment seemed especially quiet without Emma's chatter. As he cleaned up their morning breakfast dishes, he found himself thinking about Robert's confession. The job really had been about more than qualifications or gratitude. It was about Robert trying to become the kind of man who would have saved Sophie himself. David wasn't sure how he felt about being someone's moral compass, but he was touched by Robert's honesty. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "David, this is Victoria Westbrook from Sophie's party. I have some information about Robert Harrison that I think you should know. Can we meet tomorrow? It's important." David stared at the message, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. What information could Victoria possibly have, and why was she reaching out to him? Another text followed. "It's about his wife's death. Things aren't what they seem." David spent a restless night, wondering about Victoria's cryptic messages. When Emma called the next morning from Robert's house, bubbling with excitement about their sleepover adventures, he tried to push his concerns aside. "We made pancakes, Daddy. Mr. Roberts said yours are probably better, but these were pretty good too. And Sophie has a whole room just for playing dress-up." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart." "I'll pick you up around noon, okay?" After hanging up, David reread Victoria's texts. Every instinct told him to ignore them. Victoria had seemed like the type of person who thrived on gossip and drama. But the specific mention of Patricia's death nagged at him. At 11 a.m., he found himself sitting across from Victoria at a quiet coffee shop downtown, feeling like he was betraying Robert's trust simply by being there. "Thank you for meeting me," Victoria said, her perfectly manicured hands wrapped around an expensive-looking designer coffee cup. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I'm here, but I'm not sure why I should be listening to gossip about my employer." Victoria's expression turned serious. "David, this isn't gossip. I'm trying to protect you. Protect me from what? Victoria pulled out her phone and showed him a news article from over a year ago. The headline read, "Local businessman's wife dies in tragic accident at family lake house." "I remember this," David said slowly. "It was a big story at the time." "Did you know that Patricia Harrison's family hired a private investigator? That they questioned the circumstances of her death?" David's stomach clenched. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you facts." Victoria scrolled to another article. Patricia's sister went public with her concerns 6 months after the death. She claimed Patricia had been planning to leave Robert, that there had been arguments about money and custody. Marriages have problems. That doesn't mean... David, Patricia fell from a second-story balcony at their lake house. She was an excellent swimmer, familiar with the property. The family questioned why she would have been out on the balcony alone at night, especially since she was afraid of heights. David felt sick. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're working for him. Because you're becoming friends with him. Because your daughter is spending time with his daughter." Victoria leaned forward. "I like you, David. You seem like a good man. But Robert Harrison is not what he appears to be. This is insane. Robert loved his wife. You can see it in how he talks about her." "Can you? Or do you see guilt?" The question hit David like a physical blow. He thought about Robert's behavior, his confessions about not being there for Sophie, his intensity about becoming a better father. Even if any of this were true, which I don't believe, what does it have to do with me? Victoria's expression grew grave. "David, think about the timing. Robert meets you right after you risked your life to save Sophie. He researches your background extensively. He offers you a job that solves all your problems. He draws you into his personal life. He's grateful. He's lonely. That's not sinister. Or he's creating witnesses to his character. People who can testify to what a devoted father he is, how much he's changed since his wife's death." Victoria paused. "David, what if Patricia's family decides to pursue a civil case? What if they challenge custody of Sophie? Robert would need character witnesses, people who could speak to his transformation into a model father." David's mind reeled. Was it possible that Robert's friendship, the job offer, everything, had been calculated manipulation? "You're wrong," he said, standing abruptly. "Robert isn't capable of what you're suggesting." "I hope you're right," Victoria said quietly. "But David, be careful. And whatever you do, don't let your guard down around Sophie. If Patricia's family is right about Robert, your daughter could be in danger too." David drove to Robert's house in a daze, Victoria's words echoing in his mind. When Robert answered the door with a warm smile, David searched his face for signs of deception. Perfect timing. "The girls are just finishing their art project. Emma created quite a masterpiece." As David watched Robert interact with the children, he saw nothing but genuine affection and care. Robert helped Emma clean paint from her hands, listened patiently to Sophie's detailed explanation of their morning activities, and smiled with what appeared to be authentic happiness. "Daddy, look what I made!" Emma ran over with a painting of their Thanksgiving dinner. "It's our new family!" The word family made David's chest tighten. Emma had drawn herself, David, Sophie, and Robert around a dinner table, all smiling. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," David managed. As they prepared to leave, Robert pulled David aside. "I want to thank you again for yesterday. It meant more to Sophie and me than you know." David studied Robert's face, looking for any sign of the calculating manipulator Victoria had described. All he saw was a tired single father who seemed grateful for connection. "We enjoyed it too," David replied, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. Driving home, Emma chattered about her sleepover, but David barely heard her. Victoria's accusations swirled in his mind, mixing with his growing affection for Robert and Sophie. Was he being manipulated by a dangerous man? Or was Victoria exactly what she seemed, a gossip-hungry socialite trying to create drama? Either way, David realized his simple life had become incredibly complicated, and he had no idea who he could trust. The following week at work was torture for David. Every interaction with Robert felt loaded with hidden meaning. When Robert praised his latest financial analysis, David wondered if it was genuine appreciation or manipulation. When Robert mentioned weekend plans with Sophie, David found himself analyzing every word for sinister undertones. By Thursday, David's distraction was affecting his work. He made calculation errors that required Margaret Chen to ask pointed questions about his focus. "Is everything all right, David?" "This isn't like you," Margaret said during their one-on-one meeting. "Just some personal stuff. I'm sorry, it won't happen again." Margaret studied him carefully. "David, if there's something affecting your ability to do your job, I need to know about it." David almost confessed everything: Victoria's accusations, his doubts about Robert, the growing paranoia that was consuming him. But what would he say? That he suspected his boss, who had been nothing but kind to him, might be a murderer based on gossip from a social climber. "I'm fine," he lied. "Just adjusting to some changes in my personal life." That evening, Emma noticed his mood while they made dinner together. "Daddy, you seem sad. Are you worried about something?" David looked at his perceptive daughter, wishing he could protect her from the complexity of adult relationships. "Sometimes grown-ups have things to figure out, sweetheart, but nothing for you to worry about." "Is it about Mr. Robert? You haven't talked about work much this week." The fact that Emma had noticed his change in attitude toward Robert made David realize how obvious his struggle had become. "Emma, can I ask you something? How do you feel when you're with Sophie and Mr. Robert?" Emma considered this seriously. "Safe, happy, like we have more family." She paused. "Why? Don't you like them anymore?" "I do like them. That's part of what I'm trying to figure out." Friday afternoon brought a crisis that forced David to confront his situation directly. Margaret called an emergency meeting about irregularities in the municipal contract bid, the same project David had been working on. "Someone leaked our bid information to a competing firm," Margaret announced to the assembled team. "We need to determine how this happened and who had access to the confidential data." David's blood ran cold. He was one of only 5 people who had full access to the bid information. As Margaret outlined the investigation process, David realized he was about to be scrutinized by internal security. That evening, Robert called David at home. "I heard about the leak investigation. I want you to know that I have complete confidence in your integrity." "Thank you," David said, but he wondered if Robert's call was support or a subtle threat. "David, is everything okay? You've seemed distant this week." The direct question forced David to make a choice. He could continue living in suspicion and paranoia, or he could be honest and deal with the consequences. "Robert, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." David took a deep breath. "Someone approached me with questions about your wife's death. They suggested there were suspicious circumstances." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that David wondered if Robert had hung up. "Who approached you?" Robert finally asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Victoria Westbrook." Another long pause. "David, can you come over? This isn't a conversation for the phone." An hour later, David sat in Robert's living room while Sophie played quietly upstairs. Robert looked older than usual, as if David's question had aged him years in the span of an hour. "Patricia's sister never accepted that her death was an accident," Robert began slowly. "Victoria Westbrook is Patricia's cousin. She's been spreading rumors for over a year, trying to find anyone who will listen. So it's not true." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "The truth is complicated, David. David's heart sank. What does that mean? It means Patricia and I were having problems, serious problems. She was talking about leaving, taking Sophie. Robert rubbed his temples. But I didn't kill her, David. I loved her despite our difficulties. Then what happened? Leard. We were at the lake house trying to work things out. We'd been arguing, and Patricia went outside to cool off. She was on the balcony on her phone, talking to her sister, actually. I was inside, giving her space. Robert's voice broke slightly. I heard her scream, and by the time I got outside, she was in the water. But why would Victoria suggest because Patricia's family needed someone to blame? Accepting that it was a tragic accident meant accepting that sometimes terrible things just happen to good people. Robert looked directly at David. I've been investigated, David, thoroughly. The police, private investigators, insurance investigators. No one found any evidence of foul play because there wasn't any. David studied Robert's face, searching for signs of deception. All he saw was pain and exhaustion. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I hoped I could have a fresh start with you and Emma. Because I'm tired of being defined by the worst day of my life. Robert stood and walked to the window. If you want to quit, I'll understand. I'll give you excellent references, help you find another position. David realized that this was the moment that would define their relationship going forward. Trust Robert and risk being wrong, or let suspicion destroy something that might be genuine. I don't want to quit, David said finally. But I need you to understand, Emma is everything to me. If I thought for a second that being around you put her in danger, I would never hurt Emma, or you, or anyone. Robert turned back to face him. David, I know this is asking a lot, but I need you to decide whether you believe me or not. I can't live under suspicion from someone I care about. Looking at Robert, this man who had given him hope when he had none, who had welcomed Emma like family, who seemed to genuinely struggle with the same parenting fears David faced, David made his choice. I believe you, he said. The relief on Robert's face was unmistakable, and David felt certain he'd made the right decision. He had no way of knowing that the real truth about Patricia Harrison's death was far more complicated than either Victoria's accusations or Robert's explanations suggested. 3 months later, David had almost forgotten about Victoria's accusations. The bid leak investigation had cleared him completely. The actual culprit was a junior analyst with gambling debts, and his relationship with Robert had grown stronger than ever. Their families had developed genuine traditions together, Sunday dinners, weekend activities, and shared holidays that filled the lonely spaces in both their lives. Emma was thriving. Her friendship with Sophie had blossomed into a sister-like bond, and she often talked about their big family with joy that made David's heart swell. Robert had become a father figure to Emma, teaching her chess and helping with homework, while David filled a similar role for Sophie. On a snowy February afternoon, David was cleaning out his desk at work when he found a USB drive he didn't recognize tucked behind some folders. Curious, he plugged it into his computer. The files on the drive were voice recordings, dated from over a year ago. The first file was labeled Patricia Final Call. David almost deleted them without listening. They were probably random work files someone had misplaced, but something made him click play. Robert, I know what you've been doing. Patricia Harrison's voice was clear and angry. I found the bank statements, the offshore accounts. I know about the embezzlement. David's blood turned to ice. Robert's voice responded, Patricia, you don't understand the complexities of business finance. Don't you dare patronize me. I'm not stupid, Robert. You've been stealing from your own company for years. Millions of dollars funneled through fake vendors and shell corporations. I was protecting our family's financial future by committing crimes, by lying to everyone, including me. Patricia's voice was shaking with rage. I won't be part of this anymore. I'm taking Sophie and leaving, and I'm going to the authorities. You can't do that. Think about Sophie, about the scandal. I am thinking about Sophie. I won't have her growing up with a criminal for a father. This marriage is over, Robert, and your crimes are going to be exposed. The recording ended abruptly. David sat in stunned silence, his hands trembling as he stared at the USB drive. There were more files. With growing horror, he listened to conversations between Robert and various business associates, discussions of money laundering, bribery, and systematic fraud spanning nearly a decade. The final recording was from the night Patricia died. "I've already contacted a lawyer, Robert. I'm filing for divorce and full custody, and I'm turning over everything I've found to the FBI. Patricia, please, we can work this out." "No, we can't. I should have done this years ago. I was weak, afraid of the scandal, but I won't let Sophie grow up thinking this is normal." There was a sound of struggle, Patricia crying out, then silence. David's phone rang, making him jump. Robert's name appeared on the screen. "David, where are you? We were supposed to pick up the girls from their dance class 20 minutes ago." David stared at the phone, his mind racing. Emma was with Sophie. Robert was supposed to pick them up. Emma was with a man who had killed his wife to cover up massive financial crimes. I'm running late," David managed. "Can you get them both? I'll meet you at your house." "Of course. Is everything okay? You sound strange." "Everything's fine. I'll see you soon." David ended the call and immediately dialed 911. "I need to report a murder," he said, when the dispatcher answered. 20 minutes later, FBI agents were listening to the recordings while David provided context about his relationship with Robert. Agent Sarah Martinez, the lead investigator, confirmed David's worst fears. "We've been investigating Harrison Industries for 2 years," she explained. "We suspected financial irregularities but couldn't prove them. These recordings are exactly what we needed." "What about my daughter? She's with him right now." "We have units moving to intercept them. Mr. Miller, you may have just broken open one of the largest corporate fraud cases in Illinois history." As police cars raced toward Robert's house, David felt sick thinking about how close he'd come to trusting completely. How many evenings had he spent in Robert's home? How many times had Emma been alone with a man who had killed to protect his secrets? The hardest part would be explaining to Emma why their family was being torn apart. Why Mr. Robert, who had been nothing but kind to her, was actually dangerous. David's phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "The girls want to have dinner here. Emma's having so much fun with Sophie. Why don't you just pick her up in the morning?" The casual tone, the manipulation disguised as kindness, made David's stomach turn. For months, Robert had been positioning himself as the perfect father figure, while using David and Emma as unknowing alibis for his character. Another text. "David, I just realized something. I may have left some work files in your office. Nothing important, but I'd hate for anyone else to find them. Could you check your desk when you get a chance?" David stared at the message, realizing Robert somehow knew about the USB drive. The man who had saved David's family was now threatening them. As sirens wailed in the distance, heading toward the confrontation that would end Robert Harrison's carefully constructed lies, David prayed that the police would reach Emma before Robert realized his secrets were no longer safe. The story that had begun with David sacrificing an opportunity to save a child was ending with him sacrificing his trust to save that same child, and his own daughter, from the man whose gratitude had seemed like a gift, but was actually a trap. In the end, David realized, sometimes the most dangerous people are those who seem the most grateful for your help.